A blessed Sabbath to all of you. Welcome to Purelight Missions, and this is our afternoon lesson. Before we begin this lesson, let us have a word of prayer. Our dear Heavenly Father, Lord, who art above in heaven, thank you so much for this opportunity that we can learn at your feet and that we can utilize these principles for the betterment of our health, that we may obtain eternity. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. So we are looking at demystifying health mysteries, and this is part 4. And I'm going to discuss with you today the title, Complex Carbohydrates as the Solution to Diabetes. That's what we're going to look at today. On the previous Sabbath, we looked at the myth that diabetics are not supposed to eat carbohydrates. And we looked at it from a perspective that many patients are faced with this particular dilemma, that when they read the spirit of prophecy, they understand that God gave us grains, fruits, nuts, and vegetables. And the grains, the nuts, and the vegetables and the fruits, some of them have got carbohydrates in them. And they are faced with a situation where they're supposed to avoid most of these foods. And in place of that, animal foods are recommended. So we are looking at a recommendation of a diet that is high in protein and that is low in fiber, that is low in the natural water that comes with plant foods, and that presents a challenge, of which one of them is constipation, which is the mother of all diseases, which can actually lead to ill regulation of blood sugar levels in the body. We also looked at the challenges that animal foods or a high protein diet with the protein coming from animal foods presents, primarily high cholesterol, trans fats, no fiber, and these actually are contributing to insulin resistance and also thus leading to high levels of glucose in the blood or low blood sugar levels. As a result of this, then the health reformer is put in a hard and fast place. What am I supposed to do? Should I give up the understanding that I've accepted now? Should I get off the platform of health reform because of my sickness? This is now what I'm supposed to live like. This is the advice I'm getting from my doctor or from my dietitian. What can I do? So when we looked at it last Sabbath, we concluded that the challenge with carbohydrates comes when the kind of carbohydrates being used are ultra-processed or simple carbohydrates. We also looked at the functionality of regulation of glucose in the body, how it happens, the role insulin plays. And today we're going to focus more on the role of complex carbohydrates and how they assist and help in the regulation of blood sugar levels, such that a diabetic patient can actually enjoy carbohydrates to the fullest and still have their blood sugar levels well maintained. Sweet tooth, bitter harvest, the sugar and diabetes story. The book of Proverbs 25, verse 16, 27, and 28 has got the following to say: Hast thou found honey? Eat so much as is sufficient for thee, lest thou be filled therewith and vomited. Verse 27, it is not good to eat much honey. So for men to search their own glory is not glory. Verse 28, he that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. If there is anything that we are learning here, it is the principle of temperance. So the approach to dealing with diabetes, at the core of dealing with diabetes so as to be able to reverse it or cure it, is temperance. And we're going just to look into that, how you can do that when it comes to carbohydrates. The Book of Counsels on Diet, page 81, paragraph 2, says grains, fruits, nuts, and vegetables constitute the diet chosen for us by our Creator. These foods, prepared in as simple and natural a manner as possible, are the most healthful and nourishing. They impart a strength, a power of endurance, and a vigor of intellect that are not afforded by a more complex and stimulating diet. You see, when it comes to diabetes or diabetic patients, they sometimes lack that strength and the power of endurance and the vigor of intellect. And hence the confusion comes now where here we find that grains, fruits, nuts, and vegetables, they constitute the diet that will give strength, power of endurance, and vigor of intellect. But the question comes, how are they being partaken of? It says here, the foods should be prepared in number one, as simple, number two, natural, and manner as possible. So this gives room for a little bit of some processing that is desired for the food to be palatable and for the food to reach the table, but it should be as natural a manner as possible and also simple. Then it will be most helpful and nourishing. Paragraph 3, God gave our first parents the food he designed that the rest should eat. It was contrary to his plan to have the life of any creature taken, as in the case when animals are being eaten. There was to be no death in Eden. The fruit of trees in the garden was the food men's wants required. And today, with more than almost 6,000 years of sin and degradation from the Garden of Eden, if there is anything that we need is to go back to the original diet that God gave us. And it is still a good diet that can be followed even by patients that are suffering from diabetes. From the book Becoming Vegan, it gives some principles that we can look into as far as carbohydrates are concerned. It says here, in obesity, I'm reading on page 79, in obesity-ridden developed countries, advocates of popular low-carb diets urge people to shun carbohydrates in favor of meat-centered, protein-rich fare, claiming that carbohydrates are responsible for the obesity, epidemic, and chronic diseases. Did you notice here? The author says claiming. That is very important to take note of, claiming, meaning to say there is something that is not really clear or being put across as far as investigation and research is concerned. It's not as thorough as it should be. And that's what we're going to look at. Where now we have got diabetics or people suffering with diabetes now being encouraged to shun carbohydrates in favor of meat-centered, protein-rich fare, while claiming that carbohydrates are responsible for the diseases that they're suffering from. Now, let's look at carbohydrate intake around the world. 40 to 80% of the world populations usually, when it comes to the healthiest populations around the world, they eat high-carb diets. When you look at the common popular food that people eat on a daily basis, it's mainly carbohydrates that actually become part of that particular diet. For example, when it's the Chinese people, it's rice. For us Africans here in sub-Sahara, mainly it's stiff pap or sadza, comes from millet meal, and bread as well, which is also a carbohydrate. Populations with high rates of chronic diseases also eat high carbs diets. This is very interesting. So we have got this particular kind of like an oxymoron approach that we find ourselves with, where we have got the healthiest populations around the world having a high carb diet. On the other hand, we have got also another populations of people in the world that have got a rate of high chronic diseases, and they also eat high carbs in their diet. So what makes the difference then? The highest populations, Brenda Davis continues to write, eat unrefined, low processed, more natural foods that are high in carbohydrates. So this is what makes the difference. The healthiest populations that eat a high carbohydrate diet, what kind of carbohydrates are they partaking of? Unrefined, low processed, more natural foods. All right. Then let's look at the other populations. The other populations, what they are partaking of, that have got the other populations that have got high rates of chronic diseases, what they are partaking of are carbohydrates that are highly refined and processed foods. And this then leads to the diseases, the chronic illnesses that they're suffering from. So what makes the difference is the packaging of the carbohydrate. How is it coming to the table to them? That's what we're going to look at more today. So eating more unrefined plant-based foods is an important strategy in the prevention of chronic diseases, management of chronic conditions, and promotion of overall health. Nutrition is a key pillar of dealing with diabetes. along with regular physical activity, restorative sleep, stress management, avoidance of risk substances, and positive social connection. So at the end of the day, we are not taking just carbohydrates, complex as they may be, and isolate them as the only solution. By themselves, they may not do so much good as is desired. So what else can be implemented? Regular physical activity is very important. Restorative sleep, this is sleep therapy. Stress management, mental hygiene is very important. Avoidance of risk substances, this is temperance. Avoiding alcohol, avoiding caffeine, and some other foods like sugar that in itself is not one of the best to partake of. And also a positive social connection is important. So what really is it that matters? Reading from Becoming Vegan by Brenda Davis on page 81. What really matters is whether the carbohydrate is in its natural package. When carbs are eaten in the form of vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds, they are teamed with vitamins, minerals, proteins, antioxidants, phytochemicals, fiber, and essential fatty acids. And these whole foods with disease, these whole plant foods are consistently associated with disease risk reduction. Friends, we are not looking at just one nutrient isolated for the benefit of a certain disease, but we are looking at the package as God gives it from nature. We don't find a carbohydrate that is isolated in nature. It comes packaged with vitamins, with minerals, with some percentage of proteins and some antioxidants, some phytochemicals in there to make it complete. And when taken like that and prepared in the right way, and when someone makes use of some other modalities such as exercise, taking of water, then we find that the levels of blood sugar remain well regulated for the greater part of the day. So the type of sugar packaging now is what matters the most. Let's look at that. Refined sugar enters very rapidly into the bloodstream, thus it has got a high glycemic index. So when one is going to buy bread from the shops or some other food, they can see on the small corner of the packet, it can say maybe diabetes friendly, and it can have these particular words, low GI, low glycemic index, an indication that the sugar leaves the bloodstream into the cells at a low rate, or the sugar leaves from its uptake from the small intestines into the bloodstream, then to the cells. It is at a low and well-regulated level, but not low as to keep the blood sugar levels low, but for the blood sugar levels to be maintained where they should be. Sugar from whole fruits, vegetables, and grains enters the bloodstream more slowly at about 1 to 4 hours, but are still easily digested. Why? Because it comes with the enzymes, it comes with the fiber, and it comes with what I would like to call a photosynthesized water, or water that has been bathed by the sun. You know, that is very, the very nice juice that comes from plant foods. Starch is broken down slowly and enters the bloodstream over a long period of time, 1 to 4 hours, providing sustained energy. Foods that are high in fiber are usually lower on the glycemic index. So what are these carbs that we are talking about here? Carbohydrates are compounds composed of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen arranged as monosaccharides or multiples of monosaccharides made up of carbon and water. And that is the ratio that they come in with. The types of carbohydrates that are there, we have got simple carbohydrates and we've got complex carbohydrates. We discussed about this last Sabbath. We have got under simple carbohydrates, monosaccharides, which can, for example, galactose and fructose. Then disaccharides, for example, sucrose, maltose, and lactose. And then the complex carbohydrates, which is what we're going to focus on today, can come in the form of polysaccharides, for example, fiber and glycogen, and starch as well. And the monosaccharides that we have is fructose, glucose, and galactose. And here we have got these particular sugars coming in the most manner in the most natural manner that they should come to the human body as God has created them, without double bonds, without them being put together, as you're going to learn soon. So under fructose has got 5 carbon sugar. 5 is a 5 carbon sugar with hydrogen and oxygen arrangements there. And then we have got glucose, which is a 6 carbon sugar. And then galactose is also a 6 carbon sugar. Let's look at monosaccharides. Monosaccharides are produced by the breakdown of starch. For example, here we're looking at glucose. So we're looking at monosaccharides and we're going to look at glucose. And it is produced by the breakdown of starch or the conversion of other sugars. It provides energy for the cells and the only fuel for the brain. And it's mildly sweet. For example, if you prepare brown rice and you chew it nice and well in your mouth until it's in a watery state, and then you swallow it, by this time it will be tasting sweeter. And this is the food that the brain uses. And this food is good food. Friends, I want to tell you something. If you want to have good brain capacity, you want to be mentally alert, you want to give yourself the glucose. For this is what fuels the brain, and it should come from complex carbohydrates. Let's look at fructose. It's a sugar found in fruits, saps, and honey, and is the sweetest of sugars. Food manufacturers use it with corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, and is converted into glucose by the liver. The only challenge that we face with fructose is when it comes as an isolated compound that is put as a product. Sometimes it's added here in corn syrup and it's added in other confectionaries. Then it becomes a problem. But when it's found in fruit or when it's found in honey, when eaten in moderation, especially the fruits like the apple, when it's eaten with the skin, then they won't cause any blood sugar level spikes. Then let's look at galactose. Galactose is found in milk and is partially converted into glucose by the liver, and it's hardly sweet. And from the Digestive Disease and Science Journal of 1982, it says that cataracts are also linked to dairy products, and the galactose also appears to damage the lens of the eye, leading to cataracts. So as far as choosing the kind of sugar that one is going to make use of as far as their diet is concerned, especially when one is suffering from diabetes, one of the sugars to avoid is galactose. One can make use of fructose as it comes in naturally in fruit, as it comes naturally in honey and some saps that we find in different flowers. Also, as it is found in complex carbohydrates. But when it comes to galactose, which is found in dairy foods or in milk that comes from animals, this needs to be avoided. Let's look at disaccharides. Disaccharides now is sugars that have got double bonds or that have got two sugar units that have been bonded together. Ultra processing is what leads to this. And then it creates isolates of sucrose, fructose, or lactose, and binding them together with a chemical bond that is, then it becomes a sugar. So there's a hydroxyl group from one monosaccharide and a hydrogen atom from the other monosaccharide that combine to create a molecule of water. The two originally separate monosaccharides are now linked together with a single oxygen. And as is shown here, and this is sucrose, which is a combination of glucose plus fructose. And this is glucose and fructose as isolates as well. It's not like when one say maybe they bite a banana and then maybe they take, they dip into their oatmeal porridge, or maybe it's a granular preparation of cereal that has got dried bananas and some cereals in there, and somehow when they're chewing, we have got a combination of fructose and glucose coming together. When it does that, coming as God intended, it to be from nature, it does not cause challenges. But as isolates, as we find with sucrose, then it becomes a challenge. So sucrose, which is glucose plus fructose, fructose and glucose together form sucrose, a white table sugar. Sucrose occurs in beet sugar, cane sugar, sometimes in honey that is highly processed, in some fruits, vegetables, and grains. To make table sugar, sucrose is refined from the juices of sugar cane and sugar beets and granulated. Different refining processes make the sugar products brown, white, and powdered. Then the other one is lactose, which is a combination of glucose and galactose. And this is milk sugar. Lactose intolerance is caused by lactose deficiency. Milk sugar builds up in the bowel, causing osmotic diarrhea. And probably the other challenge would be lactose intolerance comes because by design, God did not design us to live on dairy foods for the rest of our lives. Then let's look at refined carbs or foods. And here, what we want to establish is that refined carbs are different from foods. All right. So when you're talking about carbs, carbs are not the ultimate definition of what food is. That's what we're going to look at. Usually, when people talk about refined carbohydrates, they are referring to grains and foods that have been processed. For example, grains that have been ultra-processed or refined, like white rice, white flour, and biscuits. Sugars that have been extracted from fruits or grains like sucrose, barley, malt, and others like that. Therefore, what people call refined carbohydrates are carbohydrate-rich foods made from refined or highly processed grains. For example, white flour or sweeteners like brown sugar. Refined foods may contain complex and or simple carbohydrates as additives, which is difficult to process as far as digestion is concerned. For example, white bread, white pasta, donuts, cakes, and candies, and beverages, which can lead to constipation. So complex carbohydrates and fiber, mainly what we're going to focus on more is the fiber aspect of complex carbohydrates. Research makes evident that foods that are high in fiber lead to a slower rise in blood sugar, and as a result, require less insulin to handle the meal. Fiber, especially soluble fiber, like the pectins, gums, slows the emptying of food from the stomach and helps to slow the absorption of simple sugars in the small intestines. This should be contrasted with the high fat meals that can result in high blood sugar levels for up to 5 hours after a meal. This comes from New Nedley, the book Proof Positive. The benefits of complex carbs are as follows. Whole grains contain fiber, which slows the breakdown of starch into glucose, thus maintaining a steady blood sugar rather than causing sharp spikes. It helps lower cholesterol, thus lowering the risk of cardiovascular diseases, and at the same time, reducing the competition for receptor sites where the insulin is supposed to unlock the receptor sites for the glucose to be able to be recepted into the cells. And thus it also reduces the amount of fat that's available in the body, which competes for these receptor sites with insulin, thus reducing insulin resistance. It helps prevent the formation of small blood clots that can trigger heart attacks or strokes. Helps an individual to lose weight by increasing satiation and satiety. It makes someone feel full and have no hunger pangs until about 4 to 5 hours later because of this particular fiber that is present in complex carbs or whole grains. So when we're looking at a whole plant-based plate that is rich in fiber, it would have the following: plant proteins, the nuts, the seeds, and the different legumes. And then we look at whole grains. We're looking at whole grains that have not been ultra-processed, like the brown rice, the black rice. We can look at whole wheat and other products that can be made from whole wheat as well. Then we're looking at fruits and vegetables, some vegetables that have got carbohydrates in them, the vitamins, the minerals, the phytochemicals, and the antioxidants that these whole foods bring, as well as herbs and spices. for seasoning the foods, and including also the use of water and even plant milks as well. Then one has got a rich source of fiber. Let's look further on complex carbohydrates. They are made up of large molecules composed of long chains of glucose molecules bonded together 3,000 or more times. Three important complex carbohydrates are glycogen, starch, and fiber. Let's look at glycogen. It's the storage form of glucose as we find it in the liver and in muscles. And 1/3 is stored in the liver and 2/3 is stored in the muscles. And not a significant dietary food source of carbohydrate though. Then let's look at starch. Just as human body stores glucose as glycogen, plant cells store glucose as starch. Long unbranched or branched chains of hundreds of thousands of glucose molecules linked together. So starch is actually the glycogen part for plants. Occurs in grains such as wheat, rice, legumes such as peas, beans, and starchy root crops such as potatoes, cassava, and sweet potatoes. 1 cubic inch of food may contain as many as a million starch molecules. And the good thing about sweet potatoes is this: when they are cooked in the right way and cooked with the skin on them, someone who's actually a diabetic patient can enjoy minimum sweet potatoes when they're eaten with the skin on them, because the skin is rich in fiber and other mineral elements that will help with the balancing of the glucose, such as chromium that we discussed last Sabbath. Grains are the richest source of starches, providing much of the food energy for the people all over the world: rice in Asia, wheat in Canada, the United States, and Europe, both Eastern and Western Europe, corn in much of Mexico, Central and South America, as well as Africa, millet, rye, barley, and oats in other places. Now, what comes in your mind when you look at white bread and the whole grain bread? Someone might say starch. Someone might say carbs. No, these are not carbs. These are slices of bread. All right, so we need to get to a point where we use the right terms and we begin to understand how we're supposed to communicate and view food. These that you are seeing on the screen, white bread or the whole grain bread, that's not carbs. These are slices of bread. One has more fiber, vitamins and minerals, and that's what makes the difference. So that's what makes the difference, because the other one has got vitamins, minerals, and fiber. The other one has got very little or minimum or none at all for some. Having said that, let's look at the comparison of the two grains, the whole grain that is good for the whole grain bread slice, and then let's look for the refined grain. When we look at the refined grain to the right, it has got the endosperm, that is starchy carbohydrate, the middle layer with some protein and some vitamins. But when you look at the whole grain, it comes with a fiber-filled outer layer at the top here, with B vitamins and minerals. It also has got the starch carbohydrate, middle layer with some proteins and vitamins, and it's got the germ as well, nutrient-packed core with B vitamins, vitamin E, which is actually the good tocopherol oil that is needed by the body to lubricate the joints and also for other productions of the body, phytochemicals and healthy fats. So just look at what is missing on the simple carbohydrate that we have here on the side or to your right side where my cursor is moving, and then the other side is where we have got the whole grain. Now, for use in bread making, Ellen White says, the superfine white flour is not the best. Its use is neither healthful nor economical. White flour bread is lacking nutritive elements to be found in bread made from whole wheat. It is a frequent cause of constipation and other unhealthful conditions. So let's go back to our diagram. The whole grain does not lead to constipation, it promotes good health. But the refined grain can lead to constipation and other chronic diseases. So what makes a whole grain? Each whole grain cannot contain 3 edible layers of the original plant seed. This is what makes whole grains a valuable part of our diet. Let's just look at it by itself. We're looking at the endosperm, the germ, and the brown outer layer. And what do we get from this? We get the brown, we've got the roughage, the fiber, the B vitamins, the trace minerals, and the phytochemicals. And then the endosperm, we've got the energy, the carbohydrates, and the protein. Then the germ with more nutrients, the B vitamins, the vitamin E, trace minerals, phytochemicals, unusual unsaturated lipids. Now, we also have got thiamine, niacin, riboflavin, pantothenic acid, iron, zinc, iodine, copper, manganese, and selenium. Friends, there is nothing else that mankind can improve on what God has done. Mankind cannot improve on what God has already made for him. Of course, one might say, when I buy my white bread, when I buy my white rice, sometimes you find all these ingredients are there, not ingredients. You find all these benefits are there. What has happened? They have added the fiber, they've added the vitamins and the minerals that are artificial, that are synthetic, which are not easy for the body to process and can actually lead to other challenges as well. Let's look at some wholesome bread recipe. Now that I've shared with you about that, when we look at the two different types of slices of bread, those are not cups, it's actually bread. So let's look at a wholesome bread recipe. What you need to make one loaf: 3 cups of whole wheat flour, that's about 1 pound, 1 teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of yeast, then 2 tablespoons of oil, that is optional, then 3 tablespoons of honey, and then 1 to 1.5 cups of water. Yeah, the yeast, one can bypass it when they're going to make unleavened bread, or they can actually make a natural culture to avoid making use of yeast, especially for those that may be suffering with yeast infection. Instructions: mix together the dry ingredients in a medium-sized bowl, mix the liquids together and add it to the dry and mix well until it forms into a bowl. Knead the dough until it is soft and very elastic, about 10 minutes. Set it aside in a covered bowl to rise until it is doubled in size. Punch it down and form it into a loaf. Place it in an oiled pan and let it rise till it's double the size. Bake it about 175 degrees Celsius for about 45 minutes. And then you wait to eat the bread, not when it's hot, because we want the yeast to do its work perfectly well until it has done its work and it has died out and there's no more yeast. That can be probably 8 or 24 hours later, depending on the nature of baking that has been done. Also, if you can twice bake the bread, the better. It's easy to digest and actually releases more nutrients as one eats it like that. Let's look at more facts about dietary fiber. It's a non-digestible carbohydrate, does not yield energy by itself, found only in unrefined plant foods. Animal foods, they've got 0. Produces a sense of satiety, slows absorption of glucose, absorbs water, that is the soluble fiber, binds to cholesterol in the intestines, slows transit of food in the upper GI tract, and accelerates transit in the lower GI tract, binds to carcinogens in the GI tract, fermented by intestinal flora, which lowers intestinal pH, may lower the risk of certain types of cancer. When it comes to intestinal flora, which is the microbiome, it's very important because this assists actually in the regulation of satiety and also regulation of blood sugar levels. Let's look at dietetics as far as carbohydrates and fiber is concerned. Diverticular disease was unknown until the early 1900s when refined flour began to replace whole wheat flour. Diverticular disease is common in countries where people eat a low fiber diet, but is uncommon in third world countries where there's a high fiber diet. Fiber creates bulk and holds water to keep the feces or the stool soft. Diverticulosis or diverticular disease is the condition of multiple diverticula. If feces become trapped inside the diverticulum, this causes inflammation, infection, abdominal pain, and fever, a condition known as diverticulitis. So this is very important to realize that before the introduction of refined flour in the 1900s, there was no disease that was known as diverticular. It actually came to be known after the 1900s when they introduced the refined flour. Fiber can be classified as soluble and insoluble fiber. Fiber, as we said, is a non-digestible part of plant foods, occur in grains, fruits, and legumes, described as non-starch polysaccharides, which includes cellulose, hemicellulose, pectins, gums, and lignans. The soluble fiber is found inside the plant cells, dissolves in water to form a gel-like material, slows absorption of glucose, and binds to cholesterol, bile, that is carcinogenic, so it prevents cancer or the onset or prognosis of cancer as well. Sources where we can find soluble fiber is oats, legumes, barley, apples, citrus fruits, carrots, cinnamon seeds, flax seeds, and slippery elm. The insoluble fiber found in the walls of plant cells does not dissolve in water, speeds transit time in large intestines. The sources are wheat bran, whole grain seeds, nuts, vegetables, fruits with edible seeds, such as raspberries and guavas. So both are needed, and God has packaged both in plant foods. You don't need to go and look for insoluble and soluble fiber as one would do in a supermarket or in a supplement or nutrition shop where they come different, but in nature, God has packaged them together in the same foods. Another classification of fiber is dietary fiber, the fiber that is found in natural and processed foods like grains, vegetables, and fruits. Then there's functional fiber, the fiber that has been extracted from its natural package and is sold separately as supplements or added to foods that are normally low in dietary fiber. Total fiber is the amount of dietary fiber, and functional fiber is that which a person consumes in a given day. For example, let's say all that we have is white rice as food, and this is all you can afford. So to help this particular, that's all you can afford as far as rice is concerned. So to help this low fiber food to become a high fiber meal, you can add some grated carrots, just a little bit of grated carrots, some green beans, some peas into it. Then now you're filling it up with some fiber and you can enjoy it, and it can help with regulation of blood sugar levels. But when you're suffering from diabetes, you want to aim to have the brown rice and the unprocessed, the non-ultra processed foods. Cellulose, the primary constituent of plant cells that occur in vegetables and in fruits and legumes. Then there's a hemicellulose. These are the main constituent of cereal fibers. Some are soluble and some are insoluble fibers. Then let's look at pectins. They are commonly found in vegetables and fruits, especially citrus fruits and apples, and readily gel in water. Isolated pectin is used by the food industry to thicken jelly and salad dressings. They control texture and consistency. And this is how the different kinds of fibers look like. And when you look at the way there are double bonds that are there, and for these bonds to be broken apart, there's need of enzyme cascades that needs to take place here. Thus, you'll find that the good thing about how God has packaged this food is that when the apple falls from the tree and hits the ground, the point at which it hits the ground it begins to change color slowly but surely. What is happening there is the enzymes have been activated by that particular impact on the ground, and it begins to digest what is within the apple, the fructose that is within the fiber that is in there, the different kinds of fibers. And now, when this is happening, if mankind would do the same in understanding this principle, it would help us. When food is taken as it is, in the case of an apple with the seed, when we take a bite and chew thoroughly, what we are doing, we are activating and releasing the enzymes to be able to begin to work in the digestion of the nutrients and the fiber that is right there. That is right there in this particular fruit. And of course, fiber is not digested. It's going to be processed as the food is going to be moving along the GI tract. But for it to be able to be realizable, it needs to be broken down into smaller pieces as one is chewing. Let's look at gums and mucilage. These are secretions from cut branches of plants found in various monosaccharides and their derivatives. Gum Arabic and mucilages, which are similar to gum such as guar and carrageenan, are used as additives and stabilizers in foods, adding texture and consistency. For example, guar gum, when one wants to make a thicker consistency, they can make use of it, as well as agar-agar, which actually can be used when one wants to thicken whatever they are baking or whatever they are cooking for another texture. Then let's look at lignans. These are non-polysaccharide fibers from the woody parts of the vegetables, such as flax or small seeds of fruits, such as strawberries, which are impervious to digestive enzymes, antimicrobial, antioxidant, and antiviral. These are the stems. Very good. So when one is cutting the vegetables, for example, kale, many would want to throw away the stems. They take pains on taking out the stems and throwing them away. It's best to cut them into small pieces and also cook them along with the rest of the vegetable because it has got antimicrobial, antioxidants, and antiviral properties in them. Carbohydrate digestion. Let's look at carbohydrate digestion. It begins in the mouth by chewing. When it's broken down the high fiber foods into smaller pieces that are mixed with saliva. Then the salivary amylase is an enzyme that hydrolyzes amylose or starch into shorter polysaccharides and maltose. In the stomach, the bolus mixes with the stomach acids and protein digesting enzymes, which digest the salivary amylase. Fiber delays gastric emptying and gives a sense of fullness or satiety. In the small intestines, pancreatic amylase enters the intestines via the pancreatic duct and continues breaking down the polysaccharides into shorter glucose chains and disaccharides. Final step takes place in the outer membrane of the intestinal wall cells, where specific enzymes break down specific carbohydrates. Maltase breaks maltose into two glucose molecules, then the sucrase, it's an enzyme, breaks sucrose into one glucose and fructose molecule, then another enzyme lactase breaks lactose into one glucose and one galactose molecule. The interesting thing about lactase is that this enzyme is available when a child is still breastfeeding, and when the child stops breastfeeding at about 3 years or younger, then this particular enzyme begin to depreciate. By the time a child reaches their teens, about 18, 19, 20 years old, for most people, this particular enzyme is depleted and it's in low supplies, and thus it can give rise to lactose intolerance when one keeps on taking dairy products. Let's look at carbohydrate digestion. In the large intestines, within 1 to 4 hours after a meal, all the sugars and most of the starches have been digested. Only a small fraction of the starches and indigestible fibers remain. Most of the fibers' actions occur in the large intestines. Fibers attract water to soften stew and binds up excess bile in order to be excreted from the body. Yes, excess bile needs to be taken out of the body. So apart from assisting with regulation of blood sugar, the fiber assists in a special way with the taking out of excess bile that can actually be carcinogenic if it remains in the system. Good bacteria, the flora, the microbiome in the digestive tract, digest fiber in the absence of oxygen. That is anaerobic. The process generates water, gas, and short-chain fatty acids. The short-chain fatty acids are absorbed in the colon and provide energy when metabolized in both the intestinal mucosa and the liver. Food fibers do provide some energy when broken down and absorbed, and may be as much as 15% of daily food energy in the diet. And that is a diet that is high in fiber. Let's look at diabetic benefits of a high carbohydrate and high fiber diet. It reduces levels of serum cholesterol and triglycerides, reduces blood pressure in those with hypertension, which normally is the case, where many times people that are suffering with diabetes end up suffering with hypertension, and those suffering with hypertension end up suffering with diabetes because they have got the same cause and effect system. Promotes discontinuation of insulin therapy for non-insulin dependent diabetics, actually reduces risk of death from a heart disease. Diabetic benefits of high carbohydrate, high fiber diet: improves gastrointestinal function, reduces body weight in the obese, and reduces the risk of kidney disease damage, reduces insulin requirements, improves glycemic control. Let's look at foods that are high in soluble and insoluble fiber. We have got dried figs, garbanzo beans, we have got large lima beans, we have got soy, beans that are dry, and kidney beans and corn grits. And when we're looking at this, when we compare with the soluble fiber and the insoluble fiber, we can see that God in his wisdom packaged these foods so well that 1 cup of each of these foods listed can actually give a certain quantity of soluble fiber and insoluble fiber at the same time, not separately. And when one eats and partakes of this particular food, they have got a blessing of both in one meal at one go. Same with carob flour as well. Actually, carob flour is the highest when it comes to soluble fiber with 30.1 grams per 1 cup. And when it comes to insoluble fiber, we find that red kidney beans are highest with 22.4 per cup, 20.4 grams per cup of red kidney beans. So let's look at foods that are high in monounsaturated fats. And monounsaturated fats are fats that are beneficial as far as our health is concerned, and also for diabetics is concerned, and it actually promotes good health and regulation of blood sugar levels. Almonds, pecans, hazelnut oil, olive oil, avocado, pumpkin kernels, sesame seeds, and olives have got high levels of monounsaturated fats. Coming back again to this new approach to viewing food, when you look at these two that are on the screen, what comes in your mind? Brown rice, white rice. These are not carbs, they are rice. Both are loaded with starch, which is a complex carb. One is lost most of the fiber, vitamins, and minerals. Okay, so we need to begin to learn the right terminology. Apart from that, we need to learn the right approach to food. These are not carbs. What is it? It's food. It's rice. Now, when you look at applesauce that can be bought from the shop, and you look at the apple, you can see the difference. What kind of carbohydrates are buried in both? Which one has lost most of the fiber and many of the vitamins and minerals? When you look at the applesauce, in most cases, when people, especially the ones that we get from the shop, most of the times they've got the skin taken out and preserves are put in there, and sometimes sugar is put there to help with preservation. But the ones that can be homemade contain the fiber, and it is healthier to partake of, unlike the one that can be bought from the shop. But when you look at the apple itself, it's still rich and filled with the insoluble fiber and the soluble fiber and the vitamins and the minerals. It has got the most. Though the applesauce might have a little bit of fiber, but the fresh apple has got the most. Effects of food processing on blood glucose levels. So in this particular diagram that I have here, at the bottom here, it's minutes after a meal, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 120, and then plasma glucose levels, 50, 55, and so on, milligrams per deciliter. And looking at the different kinds of processed apples, we have got apple juice, right, represented by the red graph, and then we have got applesauce represented by the blue graph, and then we have got the apple as it comes from nature represented by the gray graph. And all, interestingly enough, are starting at 70 milligrams per deciliter as far as plasma glucose levels are concerned. After 30 minutes, look at what happens. We have got the apple juice having a spike on the blood sugar level. We have got applesauce spiking earlier. You can see a spike is like where we've got this sharp drop of blood sugar level after about 30 minutes, close to an hour here. But when it comes to the apple as it comes from nature, you can see that the graph there is not spiky. It's actually leveling out, going up to about 90 milligrams per deciliter of plasma glucose levels. And then it comes down, not on a steep descent as it does with apple juice and applesauce, but it does so on an actually gradual descent, and the blood sugar level actually dropping gradually, such that in about 180 minutes, the blood sugar level will have not dropped so much, but has been maintained around between 55 to 70 for the greater part after an hour to 2 hours. But when it comes to applesauce and apple juice, you can see that the comparison, the blood sugar levels have actually gone lower and down as these have got high glycemic indexes, where most of the sugar is quickly being taken into use. And within a short period of time, someone is feeling hungry and they need to take some more food, or they need to inject themselves with insulin or take some other medication to help with the regulation of blood sugar. So this is the comparison of the different types of glucose levels that are found in food processing. Now, another one. These are not carbs. This is pastas, okay? The other one is heavily refined. The other one is more whole grain, okay? Looking also at this, we have got the Wholesome potato and with a potato jacket on it, and then we have got baked Hleza. These are not carbs, they are potatoes. The other one heavily processed, and the other one not heavily processed. So the other one is a simple carb, the other one is a complex carb. Now, so what we need to do is to eat clean. Avoid white sugar, white flour, processed foods, chemically enhanced foods, artificial ingredients, and you'll be able to manage diabetes very well. How then do we solve the problem? Remember at the beginning, I said it's not all about carbohydrate. We are not isolating the complex carbohydrate as the only solution. There is more. So what are we supposed to do? Live a healthy lifestyle. Eat more of wholesome carbs, fruits, grains, seeds, and nuts. Regular exercise, digestive walks, I've found this to be very useful and important. Soon after eating a meal, stand up and go for a walk. What is that going to do? It's going to help with digestion. It's also going to help with muscle cells and the mitochondria in the cells, the factory for the processing of energy, getting into action. And it's also going to help with the normalizing circulation of blood, perfect circulation, which means good health, and that will assist in blood sugar levels being well regulated. So in the lifestyle centers where I have served in the past, soon after breakfast, everyone goes for a digestive walk. If one is so ill that probably they cannot go out for a digestive walk, a walk inside is encouraged. Maybe a massage can be encouraged. But what is important is to be active soon after a meal, moderate activity. I'm not saying go for a gym or a burnout or intensive exercise, but we're talking about digestive casual walks. Eat more fiber, fruits, vegetables, grains, and nuts. Adequate exposure to sunlight, adequate water intake, be temperate in all things, avail yourself to adequate fresh air exposure. Sleep therapy is a winner. Trust in God for mental hygiene. Now, I just want to read some of the things that I discovered, and I'm going to share them with you. Whole food, plant-based diets can be used not only for prevention, but also for the treatment of type 2 diabetes. The attributes of whole food, plant-based diets that are particularly helpful for diabetes treatment include the lower fat content, high fiber content, and high water content, leading to overall lower energy density. Appropriate dosing of intensive therapeutic lifestyle change is essential in using diet for diabetes treatment. Transitioning to a low protein, low fat, plant-based diet has delivered better results than simply reducing meat and adding more vegetables. Now, when one decides to go on a total plant-based diet or to live a lifestyle that is based on a total plant-based life or diet, what one is supposed to do is to check with your doctor or your healthcare provider. And as you do so, let them know that this is what you're going to do. What this will do is that you get the appropriate dosing of insulin so that your blood sugar levels may not go so low or so high, because people differ as individuals. And when you begin to do this, there's going to be changes as far as your blood sugar regulation is concerned. And there is a need to be well informed. And one way to do that is to talk to your medical care provider or advisor, and they'll be able to assist you. And if that's not the case, I'll then give you another alternative that you can make use of. Due to potentially rapid effects of plant-based dietary treatment for type 2 diabetes, caution and close glucose monitoring with patients on medications are advisable, as there's the potential for sudden drops in glucose and blood pressure levels. Hemp iron is absorbed in a high rate from animal foods. Its pro-oxidative effect can promote insulin resistance. Using a plant-based diet to restore insulin sensitivity and treat type 2 diabetes has the potential to improve other chronic conditions, as it reduces inflammation, the unifying mechanism metabolic obesity, and cardiovascular disorders. If patients express interest in trying a whole food plant-based diet of some kind, maybe in this case, after going through these presentations, it is helpful to seek for practical guidance on plant-based eating from total plant-based nutritionists or dietitians, lifestyle medicine practitioner or naturopathic doctor, or your healthcare practitioner who values and has an understanding of the functionality of the principles that we have discussed here today. You also find my details at the beginning of the presentation. If they're not there, you can just email us on our website, www.purelightmissions.org. You'll find the details there for emailing us, info@purelightmissions.org. So the conclusion of the matter here is that as health reformers, we are supposed to shun extremes and elevate the standard. Health reformers, above all others, should be careful to shun extremes. Others on diet, page 207. The work we have tried to build up solidly is confused with strange things that God has not required. Others on diet, page 206. Those who elevate the standard as nearly as they can to the order of God, according to the light God has given them through his word and the testimonies of his spirit, will not change their course of action to meet the wishes of their friends or relatives. Be they one or two or a host, we are living contrary to God's wise judgment. Letter 3, 1884. Health reformers, above all others, should be careful to shun extremes. I repeat, the work we have tried to build up solidly is confused with strange things that God has not required. We want to pray now. And we want to invite God in our lives to help us to implement these principles. Sometimes it's fearful for some, it's strange for some to begin to implement a total plant-based diet. But I want to pray that God will give you strength and that you may make the necessary steps and that you may make the necessary preparation and inquiries, that you may make a wise decision. If this is your prayer, I'm going to invite you where you are watching today to pray with me. Our dear Heavenly Father, Lord, who art above in heaven, thank you so much for this opportunity that we can learn about the principles that govern how to deal with diabetes. Complex carbohydrates is one of the solutions for diabetics. For diabetes, Lord, help us to be able to realize this principle and make use of it for the honor and the glory of your name through our healthy bodies that we're going to enjoy. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.